All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for joining. Today, I have with me Reed Alexander, Professor Reed Alexander. Before we jump into it, I got to just give a quick, like a summary. Like you've done some amazing, cool things, but I want to point out that you're a great speaker. And for those that don't know, and you'll talk about it, you were a childhood actor that successfully transitioned into business, and your story is phenomenal. We don't hear about that very often, and you really are an exception. But I think more than that, you're creative, you're original, and I think you're a provocative journalist, and you have an impact on a lot of people's lives in a lot of positive ways. And so with that, I want to kick this off. How you doing?
Thank you so much. I'm well. It's great to be with you. And thank you for the kind words. Nice to see you today.
Awesome. So we just discovered, talking off camera, that you're literally across the street. Total
We are a
coincidence.
stone's throw from one another. And, it's a good thing you asked because it's like one of those things that I always wonder, you run into people in a mall or a restaurant, like who are you not noticing that you're so close to that you know? And had you not asked, we really would not have realized we're about 30, 50 feet from each other across the road. It's
It's so
crazy. All the
ridiculous.
places we could be. Yeah.
It's crazy. So I'm really excited. You've done a lot in your life, and there's such a great story to tell. So do me a favor. So we know who you are now, right? We know that you're really successful in journalism, and there's a whole Wall Street conversation that you're going to talk to us about. Like it's very, very cool what you've done. Take us back though, before we talk about today. Tell us who you were and how you got started, and just bring us on the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll sort of backdate into where we are now. So I am from South Florida originally and grew up in Boca Raton, so local, born and raised. And when I was 8 years old, I was going to Pinecrest School, and I decided that what I really wanted to do, because at 8 years old, you definitely know, what you want to be spending the next 60 years of your professional life doing, was to be an actor on television and on sitcoms. And I was doing a lot of local school theater, and my parents were like petrified when they heard this because they're both attorneys, so they were starting at this point. They would have been in their probably mid 30s, mid to late 30s, and they were, well on the way to building their careers and their law practices. And the idea that we were suddenly going to go and pursue an acting career really seemed untenable. But I'm an only child, so they had one kid to spend their time on, and decided to, hear me out. And I was able to convince them to let me try doing some video auditions from South Florida. This is back when we would have to like mail cassettes in and probably have them flown to California by like an eagle, before we could just send things on email many years. It's 15 years ago now, maybe
Wait,
more.
how old were you at that time?
Yeah, no, this is actually almost 20 years ago. I'm 27 now, and I was 8 then. So it
Okay.
literally was 2 decades ago,
Okay.
which is just mind boggling. So early 2000s. And it turned out that I was able to do decently well at that age fairly quickly. And within a couple of years, I had been on a number of shows like Will and Grace on NBC. And then when I was 12, I had the chance to be on a Nickelodeon show that had not actually come out on air yet, called iCarly. And all we knew about it was that it was created by the same creator of a couple of shows that I personally had watched at home, like Zoe 101 or Drake and Josh. These were, giant names for my generation of kind of late millennials on the cusp of Gen Z, who were growing up and watching a lot of kids television. So the chance to work for him and his writers was just, I mean, more than I could say at that point. So I was invited to be on the show. It had not come out yet. We filmed in, oh gosh, maybe 2007 in the summer, in the spring, in the summer, and then it came out in the fall, in September. And we knew we were onto something because we had a cool script and a cool set, and we just could not have predicted what a phenom the show would become. So we can break down why and what really made the show special. But just to say, my life has really sort of boomeranged around because I did that from 2007 to 2013. So about 6 years, I was doing Nickelodeon, that sort of world, and then went to college at NYU, got a master's at Columbia. But now the show is back. iCarly, that I was part of, 13 years ago, 15 years ago. It's hard to keep track because the time has just flown, is now back, and it's being revamped, rebooted on Paramount Plus, which I did last year as well. So had the chance to reprise some of my acting. And I'll fast forward here, but after I left the show, I got into journalism, and we can talk all about that. But for the past 5 years, I've been a journalist. And I just think it's the most amazing job in the world. So that's like a high level summary, but I can go into further detail on whatever you think is interesting
Oh, I
there.
got questions. I
But I
don't
do
want to stop
now.
you. You were rolling. Okay, so you were 8 years old.
Yeah.
You came from you don't have a story to tell like I came from a bad home or broken, but you came from a relatively like normal home. You
Yeah.
just decided you had an
Kind of
aspiration.
boring, kind of cookie cutter. Yeah, no, I'm lucky. I didn't have any real troubles to complain about looking back. But I, as you say, came from a relatively normal home and just wanted to do something that was abnormal for at least the community down here. Though I will say, Ariana Grande also went to school with me. So I don't know if there's something to that school. There's another actress, Victoria Justice, on Nickelodeon, who's from Hollywood, Florida. So I say abnormal, but maybe it's more normal than I think that people wanted to do this who are from South Florida.
Yeah, but there's so many people that have these like these tragic stories and they end up having found success, but you fortunately had something different. You had support and you had parents who were behind you and supporting your idea. So you're at 8, and it was probably exciting for them, right? So it was fun. So you're 8 years old, you're doing this, and you hear people talk about stories of struggling even to be an actor. You hit it pretty quickly, just with the right place, the right time, the right show. Do you remember how it felt when that happened?
Yeah, yeah.
You
No,
do.
it's, I don't think at that age I could really appreciate how hard it is to make it in that business because, when you're 8, 9, 10, even 11 or 12, you don't really have a professional framework or an understanding of what a career looks like or how difficult it can be to go through job
Sure.
interviews, send out resumes. All you know is what you know, which is that in my case, I auditioned. And I mean, we used to talk a lot in my youth about ratios. Like if you ever went out to if you remade your life and decided that you wanted to be a child actor and you went out there now, you would hear a lot about ratios. How many auditions lead to actual jobs that you book that you would get? And I remember when I started, somebody said, expect to audition 100 times and be asked to do one gig. Now, that does not seem like a logical ratio for anyone who's looking to build a sustainable career or build wealth. We see people in our country who aspire to be like, celebrities, but for every celebrity, there's probably 300 people who wish they were in their position who weren't able to
Sure.
really make it. And I think that's just a real misnomer about what it's like to get into the business. But my ratio, like we used to spend so much time on things that looking back are really meaningless, but eventually became like 1 in 8. Like I would audition for 8 things, and instead of auditioning for 100 and getting one, I would do 8 and it would lead to something. And that was just, I think, a factor of I had a really unique kind of role that I was right for, that I always ended up playing something very similar, which was a really smart kid who was articulate and well spoken. And I just played a lot of those roles over the years. I was never going to ace the audition for like the skater kid or the basketball player or the love interest in high school. That just wasn't going to be anything that I would really be able to pull off. But for a specific kind of role, I really had the market cornered on that role for the years that I was in the industry. So I got lucky early on. And it felt amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong, to get the call from an agent saying you're going to go out to California, because I was still living in Florida, in between Florida and New York City. But to get the call to say you're going to go out to California and film X, Y, or Z show felt awesome. But I think looking back, it's even more incredible because I was thinking about this the other day. Would I go and do that now as much as I loved it if I had the chance to just move out to California and drive around from audition to audition? It's like mind blowing to me. The way my brain is hardwired now, I don't think I could ever do that again, honestly.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, people grow and they change. And I just think when you're a
Right.
kid, like you have nothing stopping you. I was an only child, no siblings. I didn't have a care in the world. Like now, I want to be on the cutting edge of telling stories. I want content out there all the time. I want to dominate the civic conversation, which I get to do in my job, where I'm publishing stories, 3, 4 times a week. So the idea of going away for months, running around trying to get a role, and then it takes 6 months to film and a year to come out and edit and post-production, it just feels like I would be so out of the game for big chunks of time. So
Right. Right.
it's funny, like how your perspective on life changes. And I think I'm just now at the point at 27, pre-30, where I'm starting to have the 10,000-foot view and appreciate that I couldn't have done when I was half my age.
I'm smiling because I just turned 49.
Ah,
And that keeps happening to you. Like it keeps happening. Like every 5 years, it's like, wow, what was I did that 5 years ago. I'm not sure if I would do that again now. And it keeps evolving. Like you really keep
That's
changing,
interesting to hear about and think about. Yeah, because I think I'm just starting to feel that way, looking back on like college and grad school years, and it'll be interesting how I feel 5 years from now. But that's a good heads up. And
You're a
happy
baby.
birthday to you. Happy 49.
You got some awesome times and opportunities ahead of you. Like, and it's actually a really good time to be doing what you're doing. Interestingly, it all really worked out. I'm not done though with the 8, 9, 10-year-old. I got a lot of questions here. So this went on for 5 years, right? That period of
A
time.
little more. I think I was acting from it went on for a while. It was a big chunk of my youth. I was acting from 8 years old, honestly, till about 18, 19, on and off. It wasn't all continuous. What happened was from 8 when I started, for about 4 or 5 years, I was auditioning for various things. And then I landed on iCarly when I was 12, but that show continued for so long. I didn't always want to act during that period. So from 12 to 15, I really thought this is what I'm going to do forever. I'm going to be an actor. Around the time I was 15, I started developing another interest, which was news and journalism. So this is a little bit more than a decade ago. And we can get into why that was, but essentially
Don't go there yet.
Yeah. No, the catalyst though was I was just around a lot of journalists, albeit a very different kind of journalist than I am now. I really focus on sourcing and investigative reporting and breaking a lot of news on Wall Street. Back then, I was mostly doing interviews with entertainment reporters or going on the Today Show, and I was doing some cooking as well on the side. So I was always around sort of lifestyle reporters. But what I thought was so interesting about that job at age 15 was they just got to talk to the most fascinating people. And really that is what the heart of journalism is it gets more advanced and you can do really advanced kind of reporting, but it's like what we're doing. I think this is journalism. You're interviewing people. That's a form of reporting and of journalism. It's talking to people and drawing out interesting stories. So around age 15, I thought, that has to be the best job in the world. I mean, there's a million of me, right? Actors that they can just talk to an interview, but there's so few reporters who spend their lives really immersed in these fascinating conversations. So I thought, at that point, I was starting to feel that maybe acting wasn't for me forever. And you feel things, right? Like I didn't feel the burning desire to audition that much more. iCarly was going strong. A lot of roles would come across and they would say, do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And I just didn't feel much of a spark. And I would kind of pass on things, pass on auditions, pass on roles. And I thought, all right, this is a sign of something, right? Like I now am off to college in a couple of years. I can choose whatever I want to be. I can study acting. I can study film and directing. I can study screenwriting, or I could really just make a clean break. And making a clean break, I wasn't going to do something that had no sort of forward facing appeal. One of the parts of my job I love as a journalist is it's all public and forward facing, and we are out there and talking to people and leading the conversation. So I knew it had to be something probably in media and communications, but I was able to make that clean break. That said, though, iCarly was still going. So even as I was just starting to think about what a career in journalism would look like, the show was still on. So I still was nominally an actor who was out there on a show. And, so those were some of the best years. I was nominated for a Kids' Choice Award myself. The show won a lot of awards. We became, I think, the highest viewed children's show ever. We won Emmys. I mean, those were some of the best years of our
Fantastic.
run while I was thinking about trying other things. But then I went off to college and then I really did make the break. So in the end, it was about 10, 11 years that I was doing that.
So during that time, 10 to 15, how were you handling school? Did you shoot off? Like, were you going to school the whole time?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
How does that work?
Great question. So Pinecrest, the school down here that had Ariana as well, that I was telling you that I went, I guess they had sort of a formula for her and for me. And there was one other student who was doing this. And they would just send me the work, and they would often send it, weeks ahead of time. And I would try and send it back as quickly as I could, because my hedge to let them continue, to encourage them to continue to let me do this and take this more lenient approach to like not really being in class, but still being an enrolled student, was that I would just get the work done really early. Because if I was a problem student who was sending work back months later, I would easily imagine a scenario where the headmaster or the principal would say to my mom, it's not working, he's 6 weeks behind the rest of the class. And if he's going to be here, he's got to keep up with this. A lot of people, though, they go and enroll in schools in California, they go to an online school, and look, to each their own. I loved the school that I was in, and our roots were here. So the school let me have the flexibility to do the work that I was doing from California, and I would just send it back. And I had tutors, for those years. I had a lot of private education. And in some ways, it was honestly a more rigorous education that I would have gotten. And Pinecrest is a great school, don't get me wrong, for people who are local in South Florida.
I know the school. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of really esteemed prep schools, and this is one of them. But because I had so much hands-on education, I became very, very fluent in Spanish, which I've lost a little bit because I don't use it so much. But I had Spanish lessons for 2 hours, 3 times a week, one-on-one with a teacher. I was doing, writing lessons, which is probably where I developed my interest in writing, with a writing tutor. I had a math tutor. Like, it was a lot of one-on-one, hands-on education during those years. But it didn't work out forever. Eventually, a time came where Pinecrest did say, look, you're going into high school now, and these years are crucial for college prep. So we think it's best for you to either be here or find a program, and we'll help you find a program that lends itself to the life that you're leading. And at that point, I was just doing stuff that I didn't want to give up. I was doing the nutrition and the cooking for young people. I was working with the Clinton Foundation. I had just started working with the Obama White House on their Let's Move initiative. There were things I did not want to take a step back from. I had inked a deal to write my first book, a cookbook, which came out when I was 18, that I worked on throughout high school. I was just in a place where, and of course we had the show going, right? It didn't make sense to walk away from all of that. So luckily the school was able to help me find an online program, and some of the same tutors who were faculty at Pinecrest, the teachers that I had in middle school, stuck with me. And then they became my tutors throughout high school. And when it came time, to figure out where I was going to go to college, I had such an alternative, upbringing in education, that I didn't feel ready to just go to a campus, and lock down and be on a campus and be in a dorm. I needed to be in a place that really split the difference between a campus that was like a very institutional campus, which probably now I would love, versus this really, flexible environment that I had grown up in, where I was traveling and whatever. And NYU felt like that, because if you've been to New York University, if you've been down to
I know it.
Yeah, you've been, the area, what it's a series of buildings essentially built around a New York City park. So it felt very diffuse, and it felt very non-intimidating in that regard. And it really seemed like, as a school, they prize that culture of flexibility. So I thought that's the school that makes the most sense for me. And I did my bachelor's there, and I just loved it. It was great.
You did more by the time you were 18 than no joke, than most people really do or experience in their lifetime. When you were going through this, looking back now, do you feel like the way you went to school and the way you were working so much, did it impact you socially, like developmentally?
Now, these are very insightful questions. First of all, I want to say, because it did, and not a lot of people pick up on that and then ask about it. Typically the response I get, when people have heard this story, is, wow, what a great trial, what a great life. Sounds like so much fun. The reality is there's pros and cons to everything. Right. Everything has good and everything has drawbacks. And it did. I definitely lost out on some experiences. As much as I gained, and I wouldn't change it, because it led me here. I don't have any friends who are journalists that I know from South Florida who are doing what I do. What led me to that job was this really cool set of experiences that I was lucky enough to have. And if I didn't have them, I'd probably be doing something else great. Maybe I'd be working in finance like a lot of my friends, or I'd be going to law school. And those are all great paths. I have so much, my parents are lawyers. As I said, I have so much respect for a more institutional path. However, because of these unusual experiences, I recognize there was another passion. And I think about this a lot. Would I have known from watching local news as a kid that I wanted to be a reporter? Probably not. It was only through these other things. So there are significant pros. Now, the converse, the opposite, is that there are some things that weren't so easy. I wasn't here, right? I wasn't in school, so I didn't really have a lot of friends my age other than the iCarly actors. So I ended up having 5 or 6 peers that were actors living my shared experience that I was friendly with. But I
Were
didn't
you
have
able to get a close connection with them though? Like, were you able to actually?
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at, you know?
No, I think it's a good question. We were very transient, but I think what you go through in that fishbowl and that crucible, I remember when we were very young, some of us went off to Disney World, and it was like the first time that we had been out since the show was out. And I used to love Disney as a kid, and then we couldn't go because there were so many people who, it was the three of us together. So if one of us had gone, maybe a few people would recognize, but three of us together really created a scene. And you have to go through those shared experiences form lasting bonds. I mean, the actors on that show are people that I just consider like really lifelong people, that we shared something and we will continue to share it now that it's back. And they're just always going to really be a big part of my life. But there were things I missed. I talk about this as a classic example all the time. I never got to go to prom. People laugh when I say that, but like, that's an experience I hear about that's so great that I have no insight into what
It's part of growing up. It's just part of the
It's part of growing up.
experience.
It's the rites of passage of
Right.
growing up. Just making friends in college was a challenge in freshman year. Ordinary friends, that I was in class with, because I had not spent 4 years dealing with friendships and dealing with rejection and going through those kinds of social developmental experiences that people go through in high
That's
school.
right.
So I
And
had to do a lot
coping,
of
the coping mechanisms get developed, like, and that's, as I'm listening to you, I'm like, wow, like, you have to go through that part of your life as a child to learn how to cope with difficulty, sadness, loss, all these different things. And if you're maybe insulated in a way because you're living in this different sort of your reality, I would imagine you were sort of protected and there was a lot of positivity. Even when things might have really been negative, you were almost protected because you were in a very creative environment. Where do you get to learn to cope when everything is always just good,
Yeah, no, I think it's really an astute point. I think there are different kinds or different shades of rejection that you go through. Like at that age, I had not gone through so much of the social, maybe turbulence that people go through in high school. So I really did have to catch up on that in college. However, I think professionally, I did get a very thick skin very quickly. I remember, early on, just the scrutiny we all came under on the show at 12, 13, 14 years old, which is a pretty fragile time in people's development anyway. As you well know, at that age, people are kind of learning about themselves and making friends. And by 15, 16, they're thinking about relationships. They're going through the first, Valentine's Day breakup on the high school quad. What I hear. I mean, I wasn't there, but this is
you were working.
So I didn't have that, but then there were things that I was exposed to that ended up preparing me really well for a lot of rejection. For instance, there were plenty of auditions. If I was doing 1 out of 8, that meant 7 out of 8. The answer was no. And very often those were roles that I really wanted, right? Like I wasn't just auditioning for whatever I could audition for. I mean, these were things I wanted to be a part of. And I remember several instances where there were roles that I was just like madly, madly in love with, for characters that I wanted to play. And I was devastated when it didn't work out. Devastated at 13, 14, 15. I had a TV show that I wrote and sold to a network, which we developed for a year, that they had bought the concept. And then when it came time to allocate a budget for a pilot, it came down to my show or one other show. And they went with the one other show because it had a pretty A-list creator who was an actor that if I said the name, we would all know, who was producing the show. So that was extremely painful because at 13 or 14, I thought I was going to develop and then star in my own series that I had come up with.
It's huge disappointment.
Devastating. I mean,
Yeah,
really, at that age, it's devastating, and it took me probably 12, 16, 18 months, to recover. That was actually a pivotal experience. And coming back from that, when I look back on it, probably set the stage for so much of my future development as a young professional, because of that loss, I decided that I wanted to go into the food space because this was a big passion of mine, was cooking. And I thought, well, if the show didn't go, I want to come up with something to do when I'm not on set. And I was going to be focused on the show. But since that didn't happen, I decided to create this blog. And that became a huge focus for me. And I became very entrenched in food and health for young people. And that led to journalism. So actually, if I think about it, maybe that was an inflection point that was like a pretty pivotal inflection. You just look back and say, gosh, the experiences really like a trade wind blowing through that points you in a completely different direction.
Totally.
But
There's like forks in the road. Like these things happen and you don't even realize it sometimes. And it's just, oh, wow, I went this way. And now my life just took this other trajectory. And wow, what if I went the other way? It's endless how many times those things happen in life, you know?
Yeah.
I have
Painful. And I was able just to say, just to close the loop on this,
sure.
that when those experiences came in, I had a framework for how to push through later on after college, when professional rejection has come, or when there's been a beat that I wanted to be on in journalism or story I wanted to do that doesn't work. I have a very thick skin for that now. So like everything, there's pros and cons.
Are you close with your parents? Do you have a relationship where you really like, they were able to, at that time, even you had somebody to go to, like you had, as you were growing up, when you had somebody, to express things to talk about difficult times? Like, did you have that as you were going through your teenage years?
Luckily, yes, we're very close. Yeah. My family's very close. My aunt, in addition to my parents, I think, when anything happens to me or I want any insight or advice, I have a pretty solid understanding of like what solution will and won't work for me. And I don't really do anything that I think won't work for just who I am and how I operate. But there is a little bit of like ruling by committee. I have a group of people in this family that are very close knit, that know what I'm doing at almost any given time, that give their insight. And they're people whose opinion really helped to influence me. So my parents, my aunt, my grandparents, my uncle, there's probably 5 or 6 people that I will consult over any really pivotal decision, because I think that they're really smart. And I think that they have a lot of insight to share, and they have a good sense of me. And I think if I didn't have them, I would have been flying blind for a lot of the time.
My last question about this part of your life, and then I want to move on. So I'm going to make an assumption because of what you just said. You didn't have that typical story of the right people not looking out for you, business problems, people stealing from you, like all these things we all hear. You had a good set of people around you and you're okay.
Fortunately, yes, that's how it turned out. I mean, I can name people that I know personally who cannot say that, and are wonderful people, but just did have a lot of the tumult that you're describing, which I think people know about when they think about young actors, young Hollywood, so to speak. And luckily, I did not have that. And I had a pretty good support system, and it got me through to safer shores. So yeah.
You're really like solid, like grounded, like well-rounded. It's just like, I think everybody would have the same natural curiosity that I have about like, how did this all turn out so well for you? But you're listening to you and looking at you, and I can feel your energy kind of through the conversation, even though we're not side by side. It is about family. It's about the right support system around you. It's about, you clearly have an ability to not just have a vision, but you just get things done. But you're very humble and grounded, and it has to come from you. Now I know why, because you described your family to me. So it was all the right things. And by the way, the name that comes to mind, which everybody on the planet would think the same thing, is Corey Feldman. Right, comes right to mind. You know Corey Feldman?
No.
The Lost Boys. It's my generation. It's my generation. But that's a story everybody knows of. Like,
say though. Thank you. Yeah. No. Did he have a similar situation as me? Was he?
No, opposite. He's a name that comes to mind. Opposite. He's that really bad story where everybody, because he's so vocal about it, and he had like drug problems and money problems, but he was a very successful childhood actor. Goonies, the show, the movie Goonies.
The Goonies were fun. I used to watch
all of that, and it's like, that's what we always hear. Your story is the one we should be hearing, because it happens probably more often than we hear, that people are okay. Things can be good if you're smart and you have good people around you.
Well, the pressures are huge. And one of the things that I think is like a bucket list item for me as a journalist, I mean, now I cover something so different, covering Wall Street, but one thing I would like to do as someone who's just very interested in mental health, and my beat that I reported on used to be mental health, is I would like to spend a year of my life digging into that world, because I think we read so much about it and it leaks out in the magazines and in the entertainment publications, and we get like little snippets of insights when celebrities will give interviews after, I mean, honestly, after like rehab or going through all sorts of eating disorders or going away for months at a time. And it's really unfortunate, but we don't have a good piece of journalism, to my knowledge, that really takes you inside the whole system that leads there. We hear things, but we don't really know how it bubbles up, because it really starts from like the household in the middle of the country where one child wants to act. I'm not saying this is everybody's story, but this is a common story that I don't know people know. And then the 5 other kids don't. So the 5 kids stay with one parent, and then the other parent takes the one child who does and gives up everything. And then it's the child who becomes the breadwinner at the same age that I started, 9, 10 years old. And it creates this cycle that manifests. Doesn't shock me why we hear about parents fighting over, custodians of their kids and their money and their assets and their estate. It starts in subtle ways like that. And I don't think we have a piece of journalism that really probes that, how it starts, what it leads to, and the damage that it does to all parties involved, both the victim, who's the person at the center of it, and their relationships with their family and friends. And I think that would be very additive to people's understanding of that world. So that's like a goal of mine that I'd like to do one day.
Yeah, well, you're going to reach it because you reach every goal you set, it sounds like. Listen, Columbia, NYU, I mean, journalism. So now bring me forward. So you went to school, phenomenal schools. You're clearly a really smart guy. So now bring me forward and tell me, you're doing some amazing things now. So this is sort of, I guess, the past 10 to 12 years.
Yeah. So journalism has been the past 10 to 12. That's right. And it started out with just an inclination that would be an awesome job. When I would travel a lot overseas, I was really watching just the few English language channels we could get back then. So CNN International, BBC World News, Sky News, and I became fascinated with world news. So toward the end of my time in college, I moved to Hong Kong and I worked for CNN for a while as a reporter there. And that was really where I had my first bylines, was in the Hong Kong bureau, covering world news, covering news out of Asia, and really getting a feel. I mean, I spent a lot of time in like Western Europe as a kid growing up. So I figured now's the time to have an adventure to Asia, now is the moment. So it really taught me a lot just about opening my mind to social norms or social situations and customs that I was not at all exposed to. And I think that's like a rare experience at the start of one's journal. Usually you do that later, as you get a foreign assignment to some international bureau, some foreign posting. But I did it at the start of my career and hope to do it again. But it was really educational. And then I came back to the States and I spent about a year working for Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal Digital Network. Then I became a mental health reporter / editor. And it was being an editor, we were reporting on and I was editing stories about mental health research, innovations in the space, investment in the space, new technologies. And I really latched on to a story out of South Florida during that period, which was about the Parkland students and the shooting that took place in Parkland, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018. And that story was like one of the stories that I think, as journalists, we all have a couple of news cycles in the course of our careers that really define us as journalists, that teach you so much and that you spend so much time with. And that was one of them for me. I was covering that for, it didn't end, almost 2 years. And then I went to Columbia to get my master's in journalism. And my big project while I was there was to go back to Parkland that I had covered so much and sort of contextualize everything that happened through the prism of profiling the teachers. The students that had done the big social and political movements were off to college, many of them, but the teachers were left behind. And it was shot. They were walking in the closet where 30 students had hid during the shooting, hoping that they would live. Walking the footsteps where the shooter ran out after the shooting before he was apprehended. I stood there. It was really quite eerie. So I spent about a month in South Florida before COVID. This is January of 2020. And I'm glad that I did it before the pandemic, because I would probably not have gotten to do it again. Really in those teachers' homes, immersing myself in the fabric of their lives, going to the school. And then at that point, it was coming time to graduate Columbia. And I had a lot of business news experience from CNN and when I was at the Journal. And I thought, that probably is something I know a lot about and could do really well. So I joined Business Insider as a Wall Street reporter, but I had never covered Wall Street. And, when I started, the reason I did it was because I had gone to 2 New York higher education schools where I knew a lot of people that were working on Wall Street. And the topic that I was going to be exploring in this newly formed role was Wall Street culture. So the life and times of being a professional in financial services, what the experience is like, what the career opportunities are like, what the challenges are, what the financial prospects are like, what the mental health situation is like. And I came to the beat at really the perfect moment. There was a perfect storm, a confluence of factors that the pandemic had whipped up, which created low interest rates, record low interest rates, which created a huge M&A pipeline. So companies were able to take out massive amounts of debt capital through bonds, et cetera, that they were able to do these big leverage buyouts, and it kept bankers, investment bankers, busier than historically busier than they have ever been, at a time when they did not have, it's a pressure cooker in that job, no matter when you do it. But if you're working together on the floor of Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or an investment bank, typically there is the camaraderie of having other young people around you, just like I had with my friends who were actors. And we were talking about that relationship. But when you're isolated and you're working out of your parents' attic during the depths of COVID in the winter wave of 2020, it really lends itself to creating a feeling of despair. And that's what you saw among young people, terrible despair. So as an ex-mental health reporter who had a lot of friends who were living that life, I came to the topic at the right moment in time. And 2021 was a really pivotal year, I think, in my career, where I was able to not just learn a lot about Wall Street and finance, and not just banking, that's what I mainly focus on, but private equity, asset management, wealth management, a variety of aspects of the field. I covered Robinhood and Reddit and GameStop 1 year ago, last January, and the market meltdown with the day trading. I mean, I covered some really big news cycles. And it taught me a lot as a journalist, but I think it also, I basically got here at the right point at the right time to kick off my Wall Street reporting career.
And listening to you talk about it, so you've gone through the way you connected with the psychology with what's happening, and you thought about that. That was like intentional, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And you're right. What a perfect time. And it's still going on, by the way. It's still, look what's happening the past couple of days, the psychology of this market, the psychology of like what is happening around us. You have plenty to report on. I mean, it's going to be getting juicier and juicier in the coming weeks,
Yeah, there are so many threads to pull on. And one of the other things I've done here, in addition to reporting on Wall Street, has been to make it a point to cover mental health when I can. And I mean, if there was ever a year to be doing it, I covered anger and frustration among doctors in Florida hospitals during the Delta wave surge, the confusion and fear that young people felt with fighting over mask mandates in schools, and how that made them feel like they were at the heart of a tug of war over public health that could affect them because they could get sick. I just covered the other day how ICU workers in the UK, though I'm sure this can be extrapolated out to other regions, felt such severe probable post-traumatic stress during surges of the virus that they had similar levels of post-traumatic stress to soldiers who fought in Afghanistan. I mean, the ripple effects of what we've lived through have been tremendous. And I think they will continue to resound in the way of heightened substance use. I've written a little bit about that, substance use on Wall Street. I spoke, actually, one of the big stories last year that I think I really am proud to have helped bring into existence was the recognition that these junior bankers were suffering in this way. They were toiling, working all day and night. And banks felt, I mean, partially, I think this was inflationary pressure, but banks felt the need to boost compensation broadly across the lower levels. And we reported on almost every bank as they were raising salary for their junior bankers. And then when banks were resilient and they wouldn't raise salary, we'd write that too. Why so-and-so bank isn't raising salary, or what insiders think as they see their peers at other firms raise salary. And that was a huge, huge news cycle that really shook the compensation levers across Wall Street.
Oh, yeah.
And then in October, I had a really lovely invitation to come speak at Wharton at the business school there. And this is, again, fortunately, it was between Delta and Omicron. So it was like a brief hiatus where we could all wear our mask and get our booster, and we were able to be together. And I mean, I think the gratitude that young people felt in banking, that I and my colleagues across the financial reporting space were telling these stories. And I see it as almost like fighting for justice for them, to make sure that they were paid what they're worth, working all day and night. It's hard to find any amount of money that makes it worth that, but at least making it fairer I think is something I was very proud to do, but I would not have been interested in that story, the plight of junior bankers, if not for the mental health reporting background. And honestly, I don't know if that news cycle would have happened in the major way that it did had there not been a mental health reporter on Wall Street. Because we don't often see people from my background. And that's, I mean, look, there's amazing specialists who report brilliantly on, debt capital, on M&A, on IPOs, on earnings, people who really are technicians who understand global finance, but there's fewer people who feel there's value in looking at it through the prism of mental health or well-being for young people. And I think it had huge consequences by doing that last year. And, hopefully we'll find that it continues to have big consequences.
That could be such a tough nut to crack for the people that are, the ones in power, the people that are running the show, because it's going to force them to actually have conversations that cause them to have to look at themselves, their own state, their own mental state, their own ego, their own fears and worries and anxieties. And they don't, these people don't want to go there. They're supposed to be tough. They're supposed to be making money. You're supposed to be, wow, if they have to stop and actually get in touch with an emotion, it's a different conversation.
It's not widely talked about because I think there's a fear that if you open up about mental health in the context of deal making, you will come across as weaker. And you have to remember, a lot of these people are privy to really sensitive information that can move markets. If you, the client, think that you're entrusting that information to a banker who seems unstable, you probably will think that it's in your, no matter how altruistically you feel about like dealing with stigma and mental health in our country, if you are having a multi-billion-dollar event happen, either raising capital by selling equity on the public markets or selling your company to someone else or acquiring someone's company, you want the soundest, surest like armada around you to help you do that deal. So there's a lot of fear on the part of these client advisors and the banks to open up about this topic, but we're seeing it. We're seeing some banks start to show an interest here where they're talking about boosting benefits, boosting parental leave. They're talking about starting mental health first aider programs. There is now a recognition in corporate America that these issues are here. The pandemic has accelerated them, and it's in everyone's best interests to encourage people to put their hands up and get help. Because if you are suffering and you want to invest in your long-term career, it's best to ask for some help.
Absolutely. I read something, I think it was yesterday actually, where Goldman Sachs raised, I think it's the level of people you're talking about, raised their base salaries to $500,000 a year.
That was bonus. That was year-end bonus. No, not base comp. So base is still around 110 for a first-year analyst right out of college. And I think it's 125 for someone who's a second-year banker. Then it jumps up to 150, I want to say. But 500,000. So they get these really big year-end bonuses for top performers, and for partners who were the top people at Goldman. I mean, they can get millions and millions of dollars in stock options and year-end bonuses, but they vest over a period at some of these banks. The junior people, if they are a top performer, they definitely can get a $500,000 pre-tax bonus.
That must be what I read. I just was like, that sum of money for somebody at that age, I can't relate to it because at that age, I had no money. I was in debt.
Yeah, no, I mean,
so it's a lot of money.
26 years old, getting 500 grand in a bonus. But I talk to people. I mean, one of the parts of my job is to say, how do you spend the money? And what happens when you come into that kind of profit? And you would think they would say, I'm buying a Porsche. They're putting money down on a home, or they're saving for family planning. They might go on vacation, a well-earned vacation. They are investing in crypto now, digital assets, which was a story that I wrote. Young Wall Street is pumping its bonus checks into digital assets, but that's a huge source of investment for them. So make of that what you will. But it's not, it's really changed. Wall Street has changed. It's not like the 80s where people are doing these wild all-night parties. They're really, when I talk to young people who are coming into that amount of money that have worked 100-hour weeks to get it, they're really thinking smartly about how to make it work for their long-term career goals, but also just like the cost of living is high, so if they can save now, buy a home now, it will pay off later. But everybody's feeling the inflationary pressure, though and that has pushed comp up. These banks are also paying sky high bonuses because they're really concerned about losing talent. And when you hear rumors out there that Goldman is paying better or Bank of America pays better or whomever, it's easy to jump ship. And last year they suffered a lot of jumping ship. So people are paying now, not just to reward good performance, but essentially to say, don't go. You may not like your job, but we really need you. So we're going to pay really well. Don't leave. That's what they're trying to do.
This is really interesting. So you're deeply embedded in this, in these conversations, in this world. I mean, you've invested, you've interviewed, I mean, some top people. I think the gentleman from Blackstone, I forget his name, you interviewed him. So I'm curious, with you being in these conversations, it could go either way. Is it ever where people are concerned they don't want to be honest with you? Or
Sure.
is there just this balance of like, oh, wait, do we use you, Reed, as a tool to get their message out? But then how do you wade through or get through that to get your message out, to somehow get the reality of some sense of like truth out there? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a tension between our job as accountability reporters and our job of, interviewing people and having thought-provoking conversations. So yes, I do talk to, in this job, titans of industry, president of Blackstone, CEO of the investment bank Jefferies, top bankers at Goldman and Morgan Stanley. That is part of the job. And to be honest, I could just make that my job and just write whatever they say and just write about, so-and-so said this. And that might have some value in the economy of news, because these people don't, especially at that level, they don't really go out of their way to be deceptive. There is an apprehension. Most people don't want to tell me everything that's going on, right? Like, there is no desire to tell a financial reporter, this is everything we're going through, this is everything we're really doing, because most people don't want their private information aired in the public discourse. My job then is to say, okay, so we're hearing these kinds of statements, and you can learn a lot by listening to CEOs and thought leaders and getting their advice. But at the same time, we see that this is happening. Perfect example. Let's take the junior bankers. So early on, when I came to covering Wall Street, a lot of Wall Street leaders from across the industry would say to me, we're so focused on mentorship. We're so focused on diversity and equity and inclusion. And we're so focused on supporting the younger generation of talent. So then I would go and talk to these younger people in the industry, often anonymously, because there's a lot of danger to them if they are really seen to be speaking to a report and they're quoted by name. There's no danger if they're anonymous, but if we use their name, I mean, they could really lose their job. And I would hear a very different picture. So it's my job to say, all right, we have essentially two camps of people. One camp may think that they're really listening to young people. The other camp feels that they're not being heard. Where is the truth here? Where is the overlap? And then that's where the great stories emerge. So the story about burnout, if we had only asked Wall Street leaders, we're hearing or we're seeing signs that your junior staff is struggling, they'd say, yeah, we hear them and we're taking steps to support them and everybody's doing great. If we didn't put pressure on this camp of leadership by talking to these junior people, I don't think their experience would have changed very materially. So we're always going up against people who don't want to tell us everything going on, but we have to be the sentinels. Our service we're selling a service, we're selling news, accurate, nutrient dense, genuine news, not fake news, well-sourced news from multiple sources that we fact check, that we know when we hit publish, it's true. That's the product we're selling. So in order to do that, we have to push harder. We have to report harder. If there is a barrier in our way, we have to be creative enough to figure out how to overcome it and then expose the real issue and put it on display and hope that in doing so, we can do two things. One, act as sentinels and inform people what's happening. And two, in a roundabout way, even though we're really agnostic and don't have an opinion on these things, act as a change maker. The one opinion we do take is if we see wrongdoing, we want to call it out so it can be fixed, it can be improved upon. The court of public opinion can respond. So if we can display issues that are problems, you get the knock-on effects that I was saying, the banks talking about instituting mental health first aider program, paying differently. That is a direct result of journalists going out and exposing information that are uncomfortable for people. So that is really the heart of what we do. And I would say this is one of the tougher beats to do it on, because there's so much at risk in finance. Trust me, if every Wall Street deal maker could snap their fingers and make journalists disappear and go focus on something else, I'm quite sure they would. But it's our job to be tough and to overcome and to report as hard as we can.
So when you have those conversations, XYZ CEO is coming out with a narrative, the story that they tell in every interview they go to. It's their marketing, it's their story. You are. I love the way you describe what you do, because that is what journalism is, and we should see and hear more of that across the board. because that's the only way that people know what's really going on, because people are asking real questions, and even though answers may not want to be given, you press and press and press in a very creative way, and answers are given, right? One way or the other, or you're piecing together the answers. So I love how you're speaking almost for a generation. That's what it sounds like. You're like, and you're an advocate for these people. And I am familiar with what you're talking about on Wall Street. And it is a really difficult time. And it's like what you're doing is actually a tremendous service. I might have missed this early on. Forgive me if you already mentioned it, but why the attention on mental health? Like, what is that for you?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I've always been interested in it, and I actually think it comes from my past as a childhood actor. That's why people look at my career and they think, gosh, he's like kind of all over the lot. He's been a childhood actor, he wrote a cookbook, now he's a journalist covering Wall Street. But there really are these subtler trend lines that I think connect it all. I really don't feel in my own life that I've made, it's funny, like I know I've, learned new skills. I had to learn journalism, learn to write stories. Now I'm teaching how to do that. But I have, it's all followed in a sequential kind of chronological order, and everything has been an outgrowth of what came before. So mental health, the reason I think I was so interested in that topic was because growing up in California, where you do see people suffer. Again, I mean, I mentioned earlier, I have friends that I know personally from that life who have had a really, really tough time. And I've seen the toll it's taken on them. And luckily, I did okay myself, but other people that haven't done so great. So the fact of the matter is I know that mental health, it's not talked about enough, and it can have a significant impact on your life, your professional life, your personal life. And I've just seen it do that to people. So when I became a mental health reporter, I guess I started from a place of fascination. And then it became a topic that I spent a year of my life doing, and one that I wasn't keen to give up. So I followed it during grad school. I brought it here. I think it's really refreshing for people, and the kind of writing that I want to do is just as a journalist. I've learned how to read earnings reports, and listen, I've had to do it every 3 months during earnings week. And I can tell you now where to look for the comp ratio, and where to look to see how much banks spent on their litigation expenses, and what their operating expense was, and why it's up and why it's down, and what the M&A pipeline produced in net revenue for the investment banking division. I've learned to do all that. But the stories that I really want to write are the stories about the people who are inside of these firms, who are transforming them, or they are having meaningful conversations. And when you write that, there's power. You write with power. One of the stories that I wrote, which wasn't a very long story, but it was a rather short story, but it did so well on the site and it had a real impact, was about a young banker who left Credit Suisse at 32 years old, who was open about his history dealing with addiction and substance use, and is now in recovery after, I think, 7 treatment stays, something like that, and
Wow.
3 or 4 arrests. And he's now founded a mental health treatment center. So he took his knowledge of business and creating pitch decks and understanding how to raise capital by being a banker working for clients. And he used those skills to help him and a business partner found a mental health treatment center. And one of their goals is to have a specific, like a virtual telehealth treatment option for young people in finance. That story had power. And when I heard from readers, the number of calls I got after that came out from even sources who I knew that I've interviewed before, who said, you may not know this, but I'm in long-term recovery, and I overcame addiction 5 years ago. And it's been really tough to keep that at bay when I'm under such stress on Wall Street. Like real human stories with power. And that got much more of a response than just writing up an earnings report. Another story I did toward the end of the year was Wall Street sort of culture war with Gen Z. There's a new generation of young worker, and their rising tide is here. Gen Z is shaking things up in the virtual office. Some of them have never been in the office. And that story emerged to me as an interesting story out of so many conversations I had with the mental well-being of young bankers during this whole period. So some of my best work that I'm writing really with power is based in mental health, because I don't think there's anything more shared than mental health. Listen, there's a lot of things people share on this planet. They share inequity struggles, inequality struggles, struggles around race, struggles around pedigree. But one thing we all share, that we all go through, is dealing with mental well-being and responses to the traumas or the stresses that we face. So I think as a reporter, if you start by pulling on those threads, you end up finding some very interesting things.
It's really amazing listening to you. I forget that I forget your age. You really are such an intelligent guy. Like you found such an important space. And you touched on something which it makes the most sense. It's the human story. Like that's everything. You're a great storyteller, so it's a no-brainer.
Well, you understood it. It's human stories. Yeah.
It's everything. And like, I'm listening to you, and there's a few times since you've been talking, especially when you told about your experience at Parkland, I had chills, right? And so you can feel, and that's the connection when you're telling your story. So you're telling them about Wall Street, and you're talking about people that are having struggles and mental health, and it's never going to be a topic that people won't connect to. Kind of a double negative, but it's always going to be a topic that people will connect to. Always, always, no matter what. And even when they don't want to, they're going to relate and say, "Oh yeah, that's me." And if in the process, it will lead people to potentially go talk to somebody, to potentially do something that they might not have done before, which you mentioned before. And that's the impact. When I first started this out almost an hour ago with you, I said, you're making an impact. And I'm glad you just went that deep, because that's what this is about. Like you actually you're not going to work to make money. You're not going to work to just to reach your goals. I can tell you're seeking to have an impact on people's lives. Am I right about that?
I hope so. I mean, I think one of the great joys you can have as a journalist is to create social impact or make waves that benefit people. And there's like an old adage in our business that I don't often use because it doesn't really suit me. But people say in our job, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. So essentially hold accountable those people who are in power and be empathetic and come to the aid of people who are suffering. And if you're doing it right, that's what you should be doing. I don't often say that, but I hope that it creates that. And listen, there's so many ways to create good, right? Like they're frontline workers, they're the medical workers I've written about. There are people who devote their lives to charity or working with animals that have been displaced. There's a million ways to make good. The way that I have chosen to do it is I really enjoy listening to people, drawing out stories. I think I'm a decent critical thinker, have some good writing skills, and that's the tools that I try and use to be able to create some good. Now, I'm lucky that people have given me airtime to do it. This is a hard job to develop a critical mass of an audience in, or even to get in. So, I mean, we all go through burnout, and sometimes I feel like, oh God, this is such a tough slog. It's tough to report these things. And I really just remind myself like how lucky I am, given that I love news, that I get to wake up and live a life where my job is to interface with news, and not just because I want to, or because I think it'll make me, that's really my job. And whenever I feel discouraged, I just remember that, that I could be doing something else and wishing that I was doing this. So hopefully along the way, it's creating a byproduct of some good for some people.
100%. You mentioned charity. Talk to me for a second about the charity you're involved with.
I've done quite a few philanthropic things. I'm really interested in this substance use recovery, and it grows out of mental health. And I've spent a lot of time over the years working with recovery organizations. And I actually think people in recovery are some of the most amazing people you could ever meet. And something I'm really proud to have done in the past was work with an organization called Horses Healing Hearts. And they focus on equine therapy, which is therapy through essentially riding or working with horses, taking care of them, feeding them, cleaning them, giving them, decent homes. And it's really, really therapeutic for a lot of people. I think research has shown that it has very strong therapeutic properties. So what I was able to do a couple of years back that I still want to continue to do is raise enough money for something like 20 students who had come from homes where a parent had suffered or was in active addiction or passed away, to then spend a year of doing equine therapy for free. And I've done other things. I've raised money for cancer research for young people. I think we should all be as involved with philanthropic efforts as possible. And by the way, it could be giving $5 to someone, or it could be donating clothes in your closet to Goodwill. It does not have to be, throwing a charity gala to raise $1 million. If you can do that, great. But I'm just saying, literally everyone has something they can do in a small way to benefit someone else. And I hear this all the time. I can't give. I don't know. It's so the pandemic, the economy. Everyone can do something. You
You
can
can
give
give your
away.
time.
You know, you can give your time.
Give your
Absolutely.
time.
You can teach. You can give your time. You can just talk to people and make their lives a little bit better. We can all pay it forward somehow. But I say to people, think about in your life either an issue that you've struggled with, or if you haven't struggled, that's great. What is something you read about that affects you? And just find a way to do something positive there. And I think
I
people
love
do
it.
that. So that's
Love
my CTA. That's my call to action.
it. Tell me, so let's finish it up with, tell me what is next for you? What are your goals? Where if you could wave a magic wand, where would you be? What are you going to be doing in 10 years?
Good question. I think I would be doing this for sure, but I think I'd be moving on two tracks. I'd be focusing almost exclusively on investigative projects that really interest me, and then hosting a kind of thought leadership show like David Rubenstein, who's this brilliant man who co-founded the Carlyle Group. You know who he is.
Yes.
In private equity, and he has a great show on Bloomberg where he just talks to really thought-provoking leaders. And that, I guess, would put me at the intersection of those two things we talked about before, talking to interesting people in high-profile positions and asking tough questions, but then going and doing the groundwork and telling great stories about them. If it's on Wall Street, awesome. If it's more of mental health, that's great too. Maybe I'll get around to writing the book about inside the life and times of young actors and their families who give it all up to pursue that. But I think it would be something along those lines, having a broadcast forum and then focusing on investigative projects. And along the way, I hope it takes me overseas. One of the great joys about this job is it really can send you into some fascinating places, sometimes dangerous, sometimes not, but you really can see the world through journalism. So hopefully it will continue to allow me to do that. And hopefully in 10 years, I'll get the chance and I'll have done something interesting enough to be back here talking to you about it. That'd be fun.
I agree. So now we're 10 years ahead. So you're 36, 37. Now, what would you say to the 15-year-old version? If you can go back and talk to the 15-year-old you at that point, what would you say?
That's an excellent question.
What's your advice?
My advice would be something I don't think I actually could have taken back then, but it would be my advice, which would be to care less about what other people think. I really don't think that would have landed, because at that age, it's almost next to impossible, or at least it was for me, to not care what people think, especially if you are in the business of entertainment, where literally the whole business is predicated on what casting directors think and what producers think and what audiences think and what people on social media think. But ultimately, that doesn't matter. Back then, people definitely questioned me when I told them I wanted to go into journalism. Oh, let's see where you are in 3 years. Let's see how it goes in college. And people did not take it seriously in the beginning. And fortunately, I didn't listen to them. But that's the advice I would give. That's the advice I would give to myself now. I mean, there's still a big part of me that definitely wonders, what do people think of my writing? What do people think of my work? What do colleagues think? What do competitors think? And the fact is, I don't think it really makes a difference. All of the data I've gathered by living my life indicates that people's opinions have very little effect on my day-to-day tiding. And they mostly, what I do think matters is what people's opinions are of the quality of work you do and your integrity as a person. I think if you do poor quality work, or you're a person of low integrity, you will not get very far based on people who will form judgments and think things about you. But what they think about what you said at a party, or how you held yourself, or something that you wore, I don't think that has a big impact in the big scheme of things. And it certainly shouldn't now, after what we've lived through the past 2 years. So I don't think I would have been able to take the advice then, but that's the advice I would give.
That's fantastic. Look, the truth of the matter is, what other people think, aside from which I agree with you, your own commitment and dedication to quality and doing a good job, that is about you as an individual, and it's part of it's character, it's integrity, that's your own personal way. But other people's opinion of you, of anybody, I'm not speaking to you, anybody's opinion of somebody else, to take that personally or to do anything with that is futile, and it serves no purpose, because it's coming from their own point of view based on their own story, has nothing to do with you.
100%.
So their opinion is, yeah, thank you, appreciate it, but I'm good. I know myself,
and everyone
I know who I am.
I mean, I have opinions. Everybody has opinions about everybody else. That's really just the way the world works. You can try and fight it and say, it's not my place, or have an open mind. We all, as humans, viscerally have opinions. But I think those people who do get caught up in what everyone thinks, those are the people who really seem to struggle the most, I've noticed. And when I talk to people in recovery, I told you I'm so interested in that. It typically started for people by worrying so much about what everyone else thought. People who I've noticed are in recovery, people think that like people that turn to substances are maybe lazy or slacking off or don't have much willpower, or they're very aggressive, because they do have to do aggressive things to obtain the substances they're taking.
Sure.
They're actually some of the most sensitive people who I think very often spent a lot of time, for whatever reason, worrying what everyone else thought. And then the substance came in and essentially promised them to take that worry away. So the less we can spend time consumed with what everyone else thinks about us, I think the better off that we will be.
Oh my, and it's so difficult for people. I could talk with you about this for hours. And as you get to know me, you'll know why.
Yeah.
But it's the programming that happens to us as kids. You carry it, through your life, and there's people have to do the work. They have to do the work to get through why that program is running in their head. And I find that now as I've gotten older, it tends to be something I see happen to people as they get into their late 30s and 40s, and you begin to like discover yourself in a different way. I see that's when a lot of that work happens, because you get tired of worrying about what people think. It's tiring. It's just tiring,
I look forward to that. That sounds good, to get tired of it. I've probably gotten a little tired, but I'd like to get a lot tired of thinking about people think. So that sounds
everybody that I bring on this show, I bring on because I believe you have a good story, and it's a motivating and inspirational story, and you did not disappoint. I'm inspired by you. It's awesome. It's so cool.
Nice of you.
You're very humble.
You had great questions, so I appreciate
you
for drawing it out of me. It's been a really just terrific discussion.
It's been fun. I intentionally, I prepare for all these conversations by having a general background of what people do, but I intentionally don't prepare any questions. Mm-hmm. And I do that because I want to have the authentic curiosity, which is all we've had a conversation about my curiosity about you. And so it's more enjoyable, I think, that way, where we're just able to do that. It's a conversation. And you tell a great story. You're humble, and you have done a lot of hard work. And I think that you haven't even scratched the surface of reaching your potential. That's how I end every show. I tell everybody who's watching to do the work, be humble, hustle, and try to reach your potential. Your whole story is about that. That's a great way to end the show.
Well, I'm so delighted to have had the chance to do this with you. And thank you for the curiosity about some very interesting parts of my life, from what you talked about as far as social development, being younger. And you raised a lot of questions that I just don't think people have asked before. So if it was all on the fly, I mean, that's awesome. And from one journalist to another, I'm impressed with that critical thinking. But seriously, I hope that if anyone takes away anything from this conversation, it's that, you can change direction. And if it's what you want to do, very often, I think it will work out in your favor. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you. And I'm excited to catch up with some of your other episodes and other guests in the future.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Same.
Recording stopped.
So Reed, thanks again for coming on the show. Let us know where we can find you. If social media, talk about your book, anything you want us to know, tell us. We're going to post it down below, and the mic's all yours. Where can we find you?
So first of all, if you want to check out any of my journalism, you can head over to businessinsider.com. A lot of it is under the finance section, so head to Business Insider Finance. But you can also check out my work in healthcare, covering mental health, etc. But I love hearing from people, so get in touch. You can shoot me an email directly. It's so my first initial, R Alexander @insider.com, or I'm on Twitter at Reed Alexander. Instagram is the real Reed Alexander, and send me a direct message on any of those platforms. Shoot me an email. Let me know what you think of my writing, or just any questions about what we talked about today, and hope to hear from some of your viewers.
Awesome. Reed is the real deal. Seriously, contact him. Really amazing. Thanks
I hope
again.
people do. It's one of my favorite things, is hearing from readers and people who have checked out my work. So don't be shy.
Beautiful.